Welcome to History 2020. I'm Dr. Sawyer. I'll be your professor for today and hopefully for the rest of the semester. Let's get going with class. We got some updates here, guys. We got some updates. We have the Constitution Quiz Extra Credit is now open. I mentioned that in the last lecture, but it is now posted and available. The important thing for you to know is that there's a deadline to sign up for it. The reason that I do it this way, the GAs do it this way, is because we like to put a lot of times out there to be available to meet with you guys, which is a required part of this extra credit. But we also don't want to live and die by like we've made tons more spots than we even really need. We don't want to sit around kind of like, are they going to show up? We want to have it on our schedule. So go read the extra credit guidelines. It will all make sense there. I'm not going to go over it here because I want you to go there and read it and get all your information from there. But you do have a deadline. Deadline to sign up is Tuesday, February 16th at 5 p.m. So please go sign up there and check that sooner than later. Cool, because I want you guys to get the Constitution extra credit. Why? Why is 25 points? It's a lot. That's a potential 2.5 points on your final grade. That's a lot of extra credit. Weird, huh? It's almost like what I want you guys to do is learn the Constitution and that the grades will follow. Yeah, cool. So we all get something out of it if you do it. You get a better grade, which is something we both want, and you know the Constitution better, which is something we both need. So, cheers. You know what else I need? To remember to fill up this water bottle. Oh well, moving on. The week 3 quiz is going to be due. It opens Thursday, so the day I'm recording this lecture at 8 p.m. It will close Saturday at 11:59. And just a reminder, it covers not only the materials for this week, but it also covers the lectures from last week since we didn't have a quiz last week. But the only readings from that were the Constitution, which you guys read a couple of times, right? Cool. All right, good deal. Let's move on with this. Now, last time in the class, we talked about life in the Gilded Age. And one of the things that I've been doing for the last couple of lectures is trying to build this scene for you to understand the different movements that are going on. We're going to bring people into that scene, particularly beginning with Teddy Roosevelt, and we're going to start to follow individuals a little more to hook things together. But the reason that I do it this way is because everything kind of springs out of this context. If you can't understand the big problems that people are facing, the big changes that are amazing, right? The benefits of this time, it's really hard to understand how people act moving forward. Because I would argue that even till today, a lot of what our economy looks like, not exactly, right? I'm not saying on the top of it. But what I'm saying is on the basis of it. Corporations, wage work, all of these things, this is where the big questions began to be asked about this life we have now. Now, certainly things have changed. One of the problems is things have changed. This is my assessment. One of the problems is that things have changed and people have not acknowledged that because they're just kind of used to doing things another way. But at a fundamental level, we're still asking questions about economic power, economic structure. We're still in a place where the benefits of size versus the problems created by size are very much, in terms of enterprise, are very much in our head. And, somewhere in between that, there is an optimal level. Some people want to go very hard one way or very hard the other way. Usually those folks I've found to be led by ideology less than information. But in between, right, you've got to appreciate everybody's side. You don't have to believe it. You don't have to find it convincing. But you have to, when I say appreciate, you have to listen. You have to know what's at stake. And the types of listening, the types of players, again, involved at this time in the class. At this time, what am I talking about 150 years. At this time in the class, we see a lot of the similarities. We see the modern economy being laid out in terms of its foundations. So that's where we're coming from here. Now, today, I am going to talk a little bit more about the 1890s and politics and the people's situations. Then we're going to move on to this question of, it's a big question. And the question is the United States an empire? If it is, or if it ever was, the 1890s is probably the most obvious time that it either begins or was. People debate about this, right? But overall, The origins lie here in the 1890s, and particularly the end of that decade, and we'll talk about why. And it's at that time that a guy you may have heard of named Teddy Roosevelt shows up and really, really, really plays a large role in all of these stories I'm telling. So here we go. Let's build on what we were talking about last time. When I left, we talked about the different groups that come together in the 1890s around what's called it's called the People's Party or the Populist Party. This alliance of farmers in the countryside and workers in the cities. It is an amazing moment because you rarely see that. And like I said last time, or like I tried to say last time and didn't really get it right, but I finally did. Today, let's see if I can do this the first time. In the modern world, one of the biggest divides politically and culturally is between rural and urban. I did it. Those are the two sides. So when you see a moment like this where you have those people from very different worlds coming together around a common issue, that's really interesting. And it spawns all types of movements. One of the players here is that group, the Knights of Labor, that I mentioned before. The Knights of Labor are a group that want to bring a lot of people from different backgrounds, from different skill sets together in working in the cities and in factories and that type of work. But they also were progressive when it comes to race. And this is not a common thing in the 1880s and 1890s. So, not surprisingly, that is going to threaten some people. Not just in the South, but yeah, a lot in the South. And we'll talk about it. Now, we've talked about the problems that are facing farmers, right? Their problems of being under the influence of these railroads that control their lives, of the inability to maintain land, people moving off of the farm, and the farms being very unstable. We've talked about factory workers and their lives, moving into cities, their whole lives changing. But another group of folks who are living through really hard times at this period are, not surprisingly, black folks, who represent a lot of the farming class, represent some of the working class in the cities, not as much as it will be later on, but you have some folks like that. But they're in a spot that is even more unique because, of course, their lives have been targeted by powerful folks who want to keep them down in particular. Whereas you might say that a lot of these employers, a lot of these powerful people, their treatment of white workers is not so much deliberately targeted at them for being white. Their treatment tends to be incidental. There are a lot of cases in which black folks themselves are specifically targeted for their race. I talked to you guys last time, or I talked to you guys in a previous lecture when we started this off, about what had happened with the return of former Confederate control by and large of the South politically. I just want to walk through some of these cases because they're really important, because what you see in the same era is that you see that the Supreme Court is pulling the teeth out of the post-Civil War amendments. So you have in 1883 a series of cases known as the Civil Rights cases. They determined that the 14th Amendment, which says that you have to have equal protection, it does not apply to private organizations or individuals. So in other words, this whole equal treatment that only has to happen in government offices. In 1896, you have a really, really, really pivotal moment, Plessy versus Ferguson, in which the Supreme Court issues a pretty strong interpretation of the 14th Amendment that says, doesn't say you can't segregate. Now, you guys might, understanding the context that I've at least laid out, understand that this was targeted there. The 14th Amendment was meant to uphold the civil rights of black folks in particular. But now the Supreme Court says in 1896, hey, look, it just says equal. That doesn't mean you can't segregate. You can totally segregate on the basis of race anywhere, as long as it's all equal. Well, I don't know if you guys have ever seen any pictures of white and black facilities and restaurants or in places where white folks and black folks both are. Have you guys ever seen any of those? You guys ever seen those? You probably have. And have you ever looked at them and thought, wow, I can't even tell which one is which? Probably not. Because at the heart of wanting to separate people is a notion of difference. And notions of difference, when you have these elements, as the monument in Colfax, Louisiana so proudly stated, you have elements of white supremacy, then when you separate, there's going to be an imposed hierarchy. And that is what happens. In 1899, Cummings versus the County Board of Education establishes that schools do not have to be provided for black communities if they are in places that the local district deems to be not worth it. It basically opens up a complete lack and breakdown of public school systems for black Americans, and in other places allows for a complete mistreatment of this. Of black folks. I don't know if you guys have even done this before, but if you're around from the South, ask them about what it was like growing up. If you know somebody who was born in the 1940s or something like that, or even into the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, a lot of people think this stuff is in the past. But go talk to them. My godfather was born in 1955, and he talks about how in Concord, North Carolina, where I'm from, every couple of years, his school, the white school, would and this, remember, he was born in 55. This is after Brown versus the Board of Education, which overturns this separate but equal, right? It begins to. Even in his school system, when they would get rid of their textbooks in his school, they would then be boxed up and sent to the black school across town. So they were getting old textbooks, and that's where they learned from. And you hear this across the board. And so here you have it. You have the groundwork laid. You already have that turning a blind eye that really happens in the 1870s, but now you have an interpretation of the Constitution which allows a lot of this discrimination to persist and actually wide open. There's a couple ways you could do this. And by the way, I've already mentioned this. I've got this on the slide just to reiterate that there were black Americans that were very much involved, even in federal politics in this period. Although for decades after this there aren't. But there are several ways that black folks can be targeted with using these new laws and kind of overtly, right, where everyone can see it. One of them is ID checks. And it's so fascinating to me that we lose our sense of perspective. And sometimes if we don't listen, we don't understand things. One of the ways that you would keep black folks from voting in this era, and I mentioned this before, I think, I want to reiterate it, was that you would use the ability to segregate now that you have this interpretation now, so you can have white and black lines, and then you would impose ID checks and ID requirements. And then you would say, well, we're just enforcing the law, and you would send out people to check people's voter IDs or their documents that they needed. And if you just send the people to really thoroughly check the black line, then you can slow it down. At the end of the day, when the polls close, there's a whole line of black folks who didn't get to vote. This happens across the South. You just say, well, look, we were imposing the law. We were checking because we have felon disfranchisement, which, by the way, was also passed as an attempt to keep black folks away. And that is not, it's funny because sometimes people are like, well, why are they committing felonies? Dude, guys, it's all about who the witness is. It's all about the accusation. It's all about a court system that might not have your peers on the jury. But you take it away and then you check IDs, and that's one way you can do it. And this went on well into the 20th century. I was actually telling this story in a class about 5 years ago. And one of my black students in the class, she just kind of went, oh, like she kind of got something. Like I could tell, like out loud almost. Like she was like, wow. And I said, what, Brianna? What are you thinking about? And she said, something just made sense to me. She said, ever since I was a little girl, on voting day, my grandma would get us up at crack of dawn. And she would drag, even as kids, she would drag everybody in the family out to the polls to be there before it even opened. She said, we all thought she's crazy, especially the young folks. Like, what's she doing? And it never made sense to her until she learned about these strategies. And she realized that her grandma had lived through that. And she said, yeah, I guess my grandma was never going to be denied that right to vote again. This is how history helps us make sense of people. A lot of times people go through hard times. They don't bring them up a whole lot, especially, when you're younger. But a lot of times people just do it with dignity, even though they've been treated with none. And if you don't know this history, you don't understand how these things happen into living memory. My father was born in 1945, 9 years before Brown versus the Board of Education. My father was 9 when the Supreme Court said you can't keep black folks and white folks deliberately separate in schools. That means there was a whole large number of black folks still alive right now who saw their rights being taken away on the basis of ID checks and laws that were meant to supposedly secure the voting system. And I think that's one of the points that we, bringing how these things matter today. If you don't understand this history, you're going to reach some wrong conclusions. So, for example, if we got people alive today that saw voter restrictions passed to keep them from voting, then if you start talking about voter restrictions or requirements, they are reasonably going to be suspicious. Now, that does not mean that any law meant to enhance voter security is deliberately targeted to keep people from voting. It's totally possible that a new law could be proposed right now that's really beneficial, that in no way is meant to keep people away who have the right to vote. But if you want to pass that law and you hear somebody go, voting restrictions, heard that before, and you don't know this history, you're going to go, dude, you're paranoid. What are you so paranoid about? These people are worked up. Why are they so worked up? And then you're going to dismiss them. When in fact, if you listened, you might actually be able to go, oh, okay, I get it. Let me explain to you why it's not going to do that. Validate people, right? Show them that you're listening. This history, it sounds crazy to us now. It's a good thing. It's all around us. There are also poll taxes. And this is a big one here. The poll taxes and the poll tests. These are sometimes selectively implemented. But a poll tax is you have to pay a fee. And what I think a lot of people miss out on is that these are targeted to keep black folks away from voting. But they also keep white folks away from voting. Because if you are a poor white person, you do not have the ability to pay a poll tax either. And so a lot of poor white folks also suffer under this regime. And they're, to the people in power, it's like, well, that's what happens. That's just okay, whatever. They also don't like the poor whites because some poor whites tended to be Republican too. And remember, in the South, the Democrats were the party of the Confederacy. They've come back into power at this time. The eastern part of North Carolina, the western part of North Carolina, the eastern part of Tennessee, all through the Appalachian Mountains, those regions were not pro-Confederate at all. So they're not people that are on your list. And the Appalachian Mountains are filled with people who don't have a whole lot of money, white folks. And this leads to some pretty interesting things. I already told you that this People's Party that emerges in the 1890s brings together a diverse group of people in terms of their working class. But what you also see in the South, and particularly in North Carolina, is that these issues that are brought together by the Populist Party actually bring white folks and black folks together in an alliance. And there is an amazing moment in the 1890s in North Carolina where the Populist Party, the People's Party, right, this movement inside that state, it is primarily supported by poor white folks who themselves are hit by these voting restrictions. They create this movement inside the state. And they run without really a whole lot of cooperation with anybody. They run third party, but then they form an alliance with the Republican Party in the state. By the 1890s, remember, the Democrats are the party of white supremacy. The Republican Party was the party of Lincoln. This means that the large group of the Republicans in the state of North Carolina are black folks. A lot of black folks in North Carolina. And this People's Party, made primarily of poor white folks, and the Republican Party made up primarily of black folks on the eastern part of the state, so totally different sides. They strike a deal, and they start working together. Because they realize that these democratic policies that are being pushed through the state are keeping them off from voting. And they find common ground based on their situation in life. And they are a force. In 1894, they take control of the state government, take control of several city governments. They're able to control the state Supreme Court. Not only that, in the middle of the 1890s, this is a high time for white supremacist governments in the South. North Carolina had 9 seats in the House of Representatives. In that 1894 election, members from this fusion movement right here, not Democrats, they take 7 of the 9 seats in the House of Representatives for North Carolina. It's powerful. Now, they definitely had different interests, right? I mean, they allied on, they found an alliance on the fact that the Democrats were constantly pushing more and more to keep them from being a part of politics in the state. So they have differences in terms of economic policy. That's there, right? So that's a kind of thing that's going to eventually emerge. But the Democrats look at this and they're like, and they pull out the oldest card in the book. And that is the let's divide and conquer with race card. They begin investing in a ton of propaganda, talking about black men raping white women, talking about black folks being criminals, talking about white folks empowering them and empowering black folks and bringing the whole civilization down. And they whip up a ton of fear. In the middle of all this, in 1898, that fusion party had gained control of the city of Wilmington, North Carolina. They were in control of the city council. Wilmington at the time was a really progressive city. A lot of thriving black businesses there. A strong black community there. And when the Republicans there ally with the People's Party, they get a lot of control there. Well, the leaders in the Democratic Party decided to whip up a lot of fear. They raised a 2,000-person mob of white folks who march into that city, armed. They pull off what can fairly be called a coup, essentially a mob overthrowing an elected government. They destroy the black businesses in the town. They burn the only black newspaper in the town. And they run thousands of black folks out of that city, and then they take control of the government. Between 60 and I've seen as high as 300 people are killed in this. It is a full-on mob riot. That type of fear is then used again to keep whipping up fear in 1900. In 1900, the Democrats run in North Carolina on the issue of imposing even more restrictions on voting, but this time putting them in the state constitution so they can't be changed by a legislature. They whip up that fear. By this time, you're starting to see the power of the Populist Party wane. It's really only it's less than a decade of high power. But the Democrats take control in 1900. And they set those restrictions in stone. And it will be more than half a century before you see the ability of black Americans to have much of a say-so in politics in North Carolina. If you're thinking maybe you've heard this story in this class before, you haven't, but you have. Because this is the kind of thing that keeps happening. And I know that some of you guys are like, yeah, I want you to think about it hard. It has consequences that last a lot longer than this era. So there we go. Fans of democracy should be pretty upset by this. The photograph here is of members of that mob in front of one of the buildings they've destroyed. I put a link to a link to a website that has more reading about it in this slide, so you check that out. Also, our podcast, we've been trying to put together an episode on this, talking to some scholars, so hopefully that'll come out soon, because the 1898 Wilmington massacre is it just kind of got buried and forgot about. So, again, just to really drive this home, if you understand the power of inheritance, if you understand that that passing down something you've earned to the next generation is valuable, that can make a huge difference, then you should understand why depriving hundreds of black folks of their businesses, thousands of people of their property at one moment like this. Sure, maybe it's only one moment. You're like, yeah, it's one moment there. Lose everything, you're back to starting all over. Now, let's talk about everything else. So, these are the big problems at the time, but there is also a problem that I have not addressed yet. All right, you guys ready for this? Are you guys ready? Here's the problem that has been looming behind the scenes. If somebody in the room here could just do me the honor of, I'm going to show you guys a headline. Anybody, can somebody read this one for me? Anybody jump on there, jump on the line here and help me out with this? Here we go.
I can read it.
Oh, Rebecca, thank you. You ready?
Yes.
Check this out.
So it's by the New York Times, July 8th, 1884. The Dangerous Banana Peel. Amsterdam, New York, July 7th. John Bassett, a wealthy merchant aged 75, while coming home from church last night, slipped on a banana peel in front of his home and broke his right leg. What does that say?
Near
the hip. He is not expected to recover.
Good gracious. You guys have heard that before, the whole slipping on a banana peel thing, right? And you guys were like, oh, that's silly. That's just in Mario Kart, or that's just in Three Stooges. But here, I was reading a newspaper one time. I didn't even know about this. I'm looking through some old newspapers and I come across this and I'm like, whoa, somebody actually slipped on a banana peel and was totally taken out. It's pretty hardcore. And I was like, so that's the time it happened, right? That's the one time it happened that everybody's been talking about. Nope. Because you start looking and you're like, oh, here's another one. A.W. Abbott, Secretary of the City Vigilance League, has taken the trouble of sending a somewhat impassioned letter denying that the man who on Friday caused the arrest of a messenger boy for throwing a banana peel on the sidewalk is a member of that worthy organization. So it sounds like somebody was like, hey, we heard that a member of your group's throwing banana peels around. And you're like, wow, this is a big deal. I guess it happened another time then. And then you're like, war on the banana skin. Look at this. There's a full-fledged war on this. Mr. Roosevelt orders a prohibitory ordinance enforced. Must keep the sidewalks clean. Dude, Mr. Roosevelt in New York? Huh. Could that be? It is Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt was involved in the police department in New York. And this guy, years before he storms the hills in the Spanish-American War, this guy's first war against the banana peel. How ridiculous is that? That's silly. But you're probably thinking, well, that was just in New York. We're safe because we're in the South, right? No, you're wrong. Look at this. All of these right here are articles about people slipping on banana peels. Nashville, Atlanta. You got editorials by mail. Right here, the editor of the American, this is a letter to the editor. The writer hereof is under the impression that Nashville has an ordinance prohibiting the throwing of banana peels upon sidewalks and public crossings where human life and limb are jeopardized thereby. What? Treacherous peel, luscious banana, a slippery outlaw. Forbidden by state to hurl unsuspecting pedestrian to the street is not enforced. This is an article about how nobody in Nashville is actually enforcing the anti-banana peel law. There was an anti-banana peel law. That means one day the city council of Nashville, Tennessee got together and they were like, what are the most important issues to talk about? And somebody was like, definitely the issue of banana peels. And they were like, we agree, let's vote on this. Banana peels getting the spotlight. Atlanta, he slipped on a banana peel. The muscles of his back were strained and he was sent to the hospital. Slips on a banana peel and is badly injured. Joseph McCarthy, age 49, who was employed as a skilled mechanic, was taken to Grady Hospital this morning at about 2 o'clock in an unconscious condition caused by a fall. Dude, people are dying from banana peels. It's the enemy amongst us. And you're like, well, that's okay. But Certainly, like, our nation's not threatened by it. They're attacking our capital too. Miss Henry Corns, age 72, slipped on a banana peel this evening and received fatal injuries. The best part about that is it does not say that that's what caused the injuries. It's like she slipped on it and then some dude shanked her in the side. Slipped on man, Morris D. Lloyd. Oh, this is so. Oh, once again, this is rough, man. This is my favorite one, though. This is from the Washington Post. At this point, the headline's just banana peel once again. It's like we don't have to tell you. We know at this point you know what it did. It's a stranger. Stranger slips on fruit skin and upsets man on ladder. First of all, why is one dude the stranger? We don't know any of them. Maybe that's the danger. But then underneath that, Richard Lusky drops 18 feet on innocent victim. No one was badly injured. That's the amazing part about that. Dude fell 18 feet and wasn't hurt. Kid's made of steel. They're everywhere. You can go back through. We've got newspaper archives and databases at MTSU. We're actually going to use them in some of our upcoming class meetings. But if you just go in there and you look up banana peel, there are constantly news stories about people being hurt by banana peels, people who are writing in angry that nobody enforces the banana peel law. It was an epidemic. Why, though? Of those of you guys who are here, has anyone actually seen someone slip on a banana peel before? Have any of you? Has anybody? I've never seen it. It's a joke. Sometimes I'll eat a banana peel, throw it on the ground and be like, oh, it's a trap. But it's not really, is it? So what changed? What changed between this point in the past and now? Well, let me explain it to you. In order to understand why banana peels were such a problem, you have to visualize what a city looked like. I've been kind of explaining this to you. Cities in this time do not have paved roads. There are some brick roads, right? There's some plank roads. But by and large, most towns have dirt roads. Dirt roads are fine when it's dry outside. But when it rains, busy city streets, getting a lot of traffic with these big horse carts, they go back and forth, and these wheels, these wooden wheels, sometimes cased in metal, these wheels dig into the ground and they make all types of mud, puddles, and mud. And that's not even the worst part. The worst part is that while the horses and the wheels walking on top of those roads create mud, it's actually the exhaust from a horse. Well, not just the exhaust. Well, I don't know if you guys have seen horses before or been around them or just know how mammals work. But horses, they just poop where they stand. They don't even move. They're not like, hey, I got to go to the bathroom. They just do it. They're just standing there looking you in the eye and they just do it. And they're doing it all day on these streets. And when it rains, these streets are a mix of mud and just horse dung. Back and forth, back and forth. And you have created for yourself a huge mess. But then, a lot of the places around here, and you can actually see it if you look at these pictures, there are sidewalks outside. Sometimes they'll be, masonry. Sometimes they'll be planks. But they're sidewalks. The idea is you step over here and not be in the middle of all that sludge. And that works great at first. But enough people walk down onto the street and then up onto the sidewalks and back down. And eventually what happens is the sidewalks get coated in a pretty thorough coat of that mud manure mix. Enter the banana peel. Bananas were introduced into the United States. They take off here. 1870, kind of the first guy brings them back from Central America. But gradually, a lot of innovations come together to make the banana the perfect product for this age. Number one, you have a product that is perfect for the era of industrialization. A banana will last a pretty good time at room temperature. It is also coated in a peel that is essentially a wrapper. If you work in a mine, if you work in a factory, if you work any of these places where filth is everywhere, you can have a banana in there, and when you're ready to eat it, you peel the peeling off, and it's clean on the inside. And for a group of people or a society of people that are working 12 to 14-hour days, bananas are awesome. Dense in calories, high in potassium. They'll keep you going. The problem is how you get them back. Well, that's another innovation of this age, because ships get faster. Ships get faster. The United States begins looking outside of its borders. They realize places in Central America can grow these things. So they introduce modern agricultural techniques. They use the faster ships to bring these goods back. And it only gets more intense because the rise of the corporation allows for smaller fruit companies to merge into large conglomerates that can control entire fleets of ships. This United Fruit Company is really one of the corporations that defines the era. It merges together under this giant corporation. This company is so large that in World War I, this company has a larger fleet of ships than the United States Navy. So they're selling cheap bananas. Both the problems of and solutions created during the Gilded Age come together in this one fruit, but there's still a problem. The problem is most cities don't have good sanitation and trash disposal services. So what that means is, if you are eating a banana because you got one because they're available, and you finish eating it, probably not a trash can to throw the peel in. So what you might do is when you're done, do like a lot of people do at this time and just throw your trash on the ground. And if it's a wet day, you throw that banana peel down on a sidewalk. First you can see it because it's yellow. But after a little bit, it gets kicked around a good bit, covered in that mud and manure. And eventually, somebody comes walking by, and you've got a banana sitting on top of a mud and manure slick that can't be seen. And the person walking home, inadvertently, slips on that banana peel, falls hard on the ground, and in at least one case, was not expected to recover. That's how the banana peel kind of explains, and the banana itself kind of explains this era. Envision a city with these mud and manure roads. Imagine these hard factories. Imagine a lack of sanitation, and imagine, on top of all of this filth, seeing these huge ships pulling into port, bringing in this new product that people love. It was a big deal. My grandma was born in 1921. She lived in the Appalachian Mountains. She was born in Virginia, just across the border from West Virginia, up there in the hills. She was born in 1921. And, it's a little harder to get these fruits away from the coast, away from the cities and inland. But they do it sometimes. And my grandma, when she was a little girl, she said that the thing she dreamed of most was that one day she'd be rich enough to be able to eat all the bananas that she ever wanted. And fortunately, she fulfilled that dream, because if not, that would be sad. Can't really eat more than like 2 bananas. I don't know, depending on their size. Maybe some of you guys can eat more, but I'm not trying to big dog around here. Solomon did get up this morning and walk upstairs and say, "Hey, Daddy." And he had 3 banana stickers on his shirt, which he puts banana stickers on his shirt like a mark of pride. But I was like, "You already eat 3 bananas, dude?" Like, he'd been up for like 10 minutes before me, and he was like, "Yes, no." I still don't know if it's true, but he did look awful strong, and all that potassium is going to make it worse at school. Anyway, let's move on. That's how bananas explain things. On the other hand, the banana can then be used to look at the United Fruit Company, because the United Fruit Company is a pretty good example of what's going on. They operate with a degree of power over their industry that is rare, and their wealth relies upon controlling land outside of national borders. You can see here the number of bananas. Now, look, if you look at these sheets here, this is from their corporate records. Look at how things change. Look at how many acres they own, and look at where they are operating. Costa Rica, Cuba, Honduras, Jamaica, San Domingo, Republic of Colombia. Look at the total land down here and the total value and the wealth they're making. Here's a closer look over here. $500,000 in 1901 when this was issued. It's about $15 million in 2018. You guys might not know much about the countries listed here, but these countries had been under Spanish rule. They're independent. Central America and the Caribbean. There's been a lot of disruption down there. A lot of the governments there aren't quite as stable, and they certainly don't muster the resources the United States does. But more importantly, in an era of these mega powerful corporations, I just told you this company has more ships than the entire U.S. Navy. In this era, these corporations have a ton of power. And as they spread around the world, though, there's always this one issue. Who's going to protect them? What do you do if you are operating in another country and something happens down there that's illegal? You know, that somehow your land gets seized, even if it is legal. How are you going to ensure this? One of the things you might want to do is secure the government support of your business abroad. The U.S. government, though, by and large, up to the 1890s, had just kind of let foreign businesses, well, you know, you want to go there and do business? Go ahead. But we're the government. We are not a booster for American businesses. You guys get into trouble, you solve your own problems. Big corporations can do that in some ways. But it sure would be nice if you knew that you could call in like our Marines and our Navy to help you out. And there's a pivotal moment where you start seeing government begin to think the same way. And all this begins with the economic crisis of 1893. And this has been looming in the whole story here. Again, if you remember, I told you that the Great Railroad Strike of 1877 came a couple years after a huge depression. And in that depression of 1873, they began cutting wages. That led to the railroad strike that shut down the railroad in 1877. 1893, a new depression sets in. This is the one they call the Great Depression before the one that happens starting in 1929. Unemployment goes from about 4% to 10% over the course of a couple of years. And again, you see strikes. The Pullman strike. Again, you see the President of the United States coming out, sending 12,000 soldiers in to put these workers back to work. Same story. But it also sets in a bigger problem. These American businesses have become massive, and they can produce massive amounts. But the more you produce, the more you need markets, new markets. Because if I can continue to amp up my production, but I got nowhere to sell it, that's a problem. And that's what a lot of people see here. They're like, well, we've been producing more and more, but we're not getting enough people to buy them. So while you see the social and economic unrest at home, the government looks abroad, and different people within the government see different solutions here. But one thing is, business is for the idea of reaching out abroad. And if you have new markets, that means you get rid of this economic crisis, which means that maybe you could stop some of this unrest. And hell, there's one thing people in power know. It's a good foreign war will get people all rallied together and kind of forget about their differences. That's an old strategy. So it's this 1893, this downturn, that begins American politicians saying, we need to use our government power more like the British and the French do. The British and the French are out there backing up all of their foreign holdings. Maybe we should start doing that too. And they do. And this 1893 crisis has some interesting consequences. Especially in a little place called Hawaii. A lot of Americans have moved to Hawaii at this point. There's a lot of American power there. Why? Same reason United Fruit Company's down in Central America. Shipping and the ability to produce things in the Caribbean islands. And a big export from Hawaii is sugar. It's brought powerful American businessmen out there who essentially control the island. Now, they're not the first settlers to go there. In 1820, the first missionaries had arrived in Hawaii to try to convert the Hawaiians. And they did like most Europeans do, or not just Europeans, but any group that comes together that have been separated for a long time. Along with their missionary zeal, they bring diseases. And by 1850s, disease had reduced the native population down to less than 20% of what it had been just a couple of decades earlier. By the 1880s, American businesses had come to control the sugar plantations there and made a lot of money. But at this point, Hawaii is not part of the United States. It's an island. It's got its own government. In 1893, though, in response to the economic downturn, the United States announces tariffs on imports. One of the tariffs is a tariff on sugar. And for those of you guys who don't know what a tariff is, it's a tax on imported goods. And it's meant to protect domestic production. Now, we don't have cane sugar in the United States of America. We have beet sugar. So the idea is we're going to shut off imports, make them more expensive so that we can try to capture that development here, capture the market here in the United States. They knew it was coming in cheaper from Hawaii. So in response to the fact that this tariff was going to cut into profits, a group of U.S. businessmen based in Hawaii works with a U.S. representative there in Hawaii, right? And remember, this is not a part of the United States. You've got to remember this. The local representative of the United States government works together with these businessmen. And in 1893, they pull off a coup to overthrow the government of Hawaii, the Republic of Hawaii. There's a queen. They overthrow the government and proclaim it to be the Republic of Hawaii. Again, Texas, you're not the only one. They overthrow the government of the people that actually live there. They use the U.S. Marines to do this. This is not authorized by Congress at all. In fact, it was frowned upon. And to the credit of the people in Congress, it was, when this happened, they shunned them. They rebuked the guy who did it. But they overthrew the government of Hawaii because they did not want their businesses to be hurt by the tariffs. And they believed that if they could overthrow that government and declare themselves a republic, then they could be annexed by the United States. And as part of the United States, they wouldn't have to pay the tariff anymore. Now, again, Texas, this is going to sound familiar to you. They proclaim themselves a republic. They do it without authorization from the federal government, and in fact, against the wishes of. And Hawaii petitions immediately to be brought into the United States. But Congress goes, nope, that wasn't cool. We are not endorsing this at all. You're not coming in. So Hawaii remains a republic for several years. That's 1893, though. As you guys know, eventually it gets brought in. Let me point something out here. This new government here. If you look at this picture, look at these folks. Here is the cabinet, the executive cabinet of this new Republic of Hawaii. You notice anything about these folks? Yeah, none of them are native Hawaiians. So, Republic. Also, you see the name of the guy? You see the name of the guy there? The president? The president of the Republic of Hawaii? Recognize that last name? Yeah. He's going to invite a relative to come in and set up a fruit company in that republic after this coup. And thanks to the coup, the Dole Fruit Company is going to be incredibly successful moving forward. It's always weird when you find out about these things, huh? And that, friends, 1893. Throughout that decade, Americans are going to begin looking further out, begin imagining that the U.S. government's role is to support American business abroad. This is going to bring Hawaii in. It's also going to spark a war, Spanish-American War, in which the United States begins, as I said, the overt conquest of foreign lands, largely for economic reasons. Talk more about that in the next class. Have a great day.